Good morning, good afternoon. Depends upon where you are in the world. If it's Friday, it's the CEO series. Our guest today is David McKnight, image consultant, certified executive coach, author. David is an image consultant, executive coach, author, and speaker. He's the president of McKnight Image Lab, a coaching and consulting firm based in New York and Miami, which he founded in 2006 while still working in corporate. He loves helping ambitious professionals leverage their image and personal brand as strategic levers to skyrocket their professional success. He's a certified professional coach through the Institute of Professional Excellence in Coaching. He's been featured in multiple media outlets such as the New York Times, New York Post, Inc. Magazine, Huffington Post, Time Out New York, Wall Street Journal, to name a few. David, thank you for being a guest and welcome to the show.
Ron, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here with you. This has been a long time coming. You and I have known each other virtually through email for many, many years. And this is actually our first opportunity to meet face-to-face or live, the new definition of live anyway. Yeah. So it's such an honor to be here, and I'm super excited about the topic that we're going to be addressing today.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it's an important topic because COVID has kind of disrupted everything. So I want to start with, I was reading an article that you put out. It says the art of dressing isn't about fashion. It's about maximizing your personal value through a polished and authentic appearance. Whoa. Break that down for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I do believe that the art of dressing is not about fashion. It's really, for me, about expressing your own sense of style. And so that means that style and fashion are not necessarily equal. Fashion is really more focused on what's of the moment, what's hot, what's currently trending. Yeah. That's what fashion is. But style is timeless. It's really about your ability to express yourself. And it's about finding your own unique visual voice. If you think about it, light travels faster than sound. And so that means that people will see you before they hear you. And so it's important for us to remember that. I also like to think of our appearance as an asset. And so it's really important to always be aware and thinking about how can we maximize this asset so that it yields the most value for us. And so those are just a couple of thoughts that I have.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because that presence, so, looking at someone and you maybe do a quick size up, based on that. So in a dress down era, would that still apply if we're, say, not wearing suits? How would that play out in a work from home scenario or hybrid, going to the office 2-3 days a week?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let's just face it, the times are changing. They're still changing. I believe that we're in a period now where there's been this slow, constant, progressive shift towards really becoming a much more casual attire environment. And this has actually been happening for the past 25 years. It started in the late 1990s when casual Fridays became very popular. And I remember the days when I first started working back in 1996, And you could actually pay, let's say $5 or $10, and you got a little sticker that you would wear. And then that permitted you to be able to wear jeans on that Friday.
Yeah.
And so it actually transitioned from being event-based to actually becoming the norm, and where a lot of industries started adopting what I'll call persistent casual Fridays.
Mm-hmm.
And then we actually moved to the point where entire industries really started to shift to completely business casual and eventually casual cultures. For example, the tech industry and even advertising. It wasn't until March 5th, 2019, that the formal business uniform was unofficially declared dead. Do you know what happened on that date?
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, that was the date when Goldman Sachs senior executives issued a company-wide policy announcing this new firm-wide flexible dress code.
Okay.
And so once that happened, then everyone else followed suit. And so there are still some industries or some pockets where suits are still the norm. For example, if you're here in the US and you work in Washington, D.C., a lot of people who work on the Hill, they still wear suits. And so it's very common in that particular environment. And in a lot of legal settings or offices, suits are still the norm. But I would say the business world in general, I won't say that they're extinct. There still is a place for them, but they're not as pervasive. And so there's definitely been this shift towards just a very much more relaxed environment.
Okay. Well, you know, I started laughing when you were talking about that, because I was an executive for IBM at that time, and we were struggling with dress down, and it was going to be on Fridays, and we were trying to figure out how could we put something in place to give some guidance. And you know what we ended up with? Just to move your tie, nice shirt, suit, and the whole bit. So the only adjustment we made was to take the tie away. But if you had a client meeting, you had to come in dressed that day, and that was the only kind of change that we made to adhere to people wanting to come in a different way. Now, you also mentioned suits. And when I grew up as a kid, my father at my college graduation took us to his tailor, and we had custom suits made. And I was so enthralled with that process that even to this day, I still get suits made, because when you think about it, it's not really that much different from buying one off the rack. So that resonated. I didn't realize that date, that was kind of the shift in kind of moving that forward.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, after that was announced, I mean, there was this huge shift in the industry, particularly in the industry that I work in, which is image consulting, and I also do executive coaching, which we talked about. And it created a lot of opportunity, because what happened was a lot of professionals actually became confused. They weren't sure what to wear, especially if you had a wardrobe that consisted primarily of business suits for men and for women. It's like, okay, well, I'm no longer required to wear a suit. What do I wear? And so basically as a result of that, there was a peak in my business, and I started working with a lot of clients, men and women, to help them to redefine and recraft their wardrobe. In fact, I remember a situation where there was a woman who left a formal attire firm, and she went to work for another firm, an investment firm, that was business casual. And so she hadn't made the shift yet in terms of her wardrobe. And she was still wearing suits every day in this casual environment. And so one day, one of the partners actually pulled her aside and said, you know, we really need you to stop wearing the suits, because some of your colleagues and peers and junior resources find you unapproachable. And so it's laughable almost, because we've made this shift, and now dressing down is the norm. And really, unfortunately for me, what I've observed is that it makes it a little more difficult to look like a leader, so to speak, because rules used to be very easy and simple.
Yeah.
Shirt, a tie, and a suit. Now, how do you really exude that appearance of a leader and that confidence when you no longer have to wear a jacket or a suit or even a button-down shirt in some instances? And so it's really been an adjustment period for a lot of people.
Yeah. So in talking through that, I'm picking up executive presence. So the way that I present myself, the young lady who was still doing suits, that didn't gel because the people she was dealing with were all looking a different way. So her concept of executive presence was totally different. So executive presence in a post-COVID environment, how do we decipher that? I mean, do I just do the IBM thing that we did? Okay, guys, no more ties. Ladies, no more ties. No more button up. You're just going to remove the so-called official symbol of business.
Yeah, great question. So first of all, we've been really talking primarily about appearance.
Okay.
We've been talking about style and suits. Executive presence is a lot more than appearance. Yes, appearance is a very critical pillar of executive presence, but executive presence is also about how you communicate, how you act and behave. It's also about your virtual presence or your online presence, and of course, the appearance piece, which we've talked about. So as we think about our executive presence, it's really important to keep those 4 pillars in mind. Let me also say that as you move up the ladder, it's also about how you make people feel as a leader. Do you motivate them to act? Do you inspire them? Are you able to effectively influence them? And so there's a number of things that really comprise this notion, this idea of executive presence. And so let's think about the 4 pillars, if you will, appearance, behavior, communication, and the virtual presence. But really, for me, the mastery of soft skills is the foundation.
Okay.
So those pillars will not be stable without really mastering soft skills. And so soft skills need to be a part of the conversation as well.
Could you repeat the 4 pillars again?
Absolutely. Appearance, communication, behavior, and your digital presence. We also call it virtual presence, online presence. But those are the 4 pillars. And then we, of course, can't forget about the importance of mastering your soft skills. And so it's how you make people feel.
Okay. Take us a little deeper into how do you make people feel? Because I've been reading a lot of research on leadership competencies and how they've changed. And it's exactly what you said around the soft skills piece. But if I'm not a soft skills person, if I'm just a technical person, get the work done, I need it on this day, KPIs, how do I develop soft skills?
Yeah, and you know, I think that this particular area, soft skills, it's really what separates the best from those people that are just good. And so even as an engineer, yes, you can be really technically competent and really sharp at what you do, but it's those engineers with the soft skills that are truly differentiated. And so if you think about it, back during or before the financial crisis that happened in 2008, we almost thought that leaders needed to have these big, forceful, boisterous presence. And so after the financial crisis, what we realized is that the ability to appear calm, to appear composed, clear thinking, confident,
Yeah.
That's what we really started to think about leaders as. And so this whole idea of having grace under fire became very important. And even today with COVID, as organizations had to lay off thousands of people or shut down or make decisions overnight to have people work from home, what really separated the greatest leaders or the best leaders were those who were able to do it in a way that was confident, but also instilled trust in employees.
Okay.
So by focusing on these softer skills, that's how you will stand out in a very, very crowded market.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because two things came to mind. Project Oxygen, that was a big research project back in 2008 that Google did to try and differentiate what makes a great manager. And the majority of their job families were based around engineering. And it is exactly what you said. The engineers that were leading teams that had great soft skills were great managers. And the ones that were, they were more focused on the technical side, their managers' ratings were not great. So these are the kind of things that we talk about. I did a leadership development session this past week, and that was one of the things we talked about, the soft skills side of what you need. And my term for it is from the 180 approach to leadership, or the 360 approach. 360 approach is soft skills, because I want to know everything there is to know that I would need to know to make sure that we connect, and build a relationship around that. So it's exactly the same thing you said. And if anyone were to search for Project Oxygen and read through that, it sinks in exactly to the same thing that David was just talking about. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
So you go ahead. You have a comment on that, or?
I was just going to say I'm not familiar with Project Oxygen, but I will absolutely check that out and read up on it. Okay.
So presence, virtual. A lot of your business now, I'm sure, or at least for the past, has been around virtual, has been around this type platform. How can what are some tips you would give for people to, create that presence online, the virtual aspect of presenting? And
the virtual presence has become so paramount these days because, as you mentioned, we've been working from home for the past year. And I have been doing a lot of coaching on how to develop this executive or this virtual presence. What does it mean? Well, we're now living in a 2D world. And so a lot of the sensory perception that we used to really feel the energy of a room, to help read the audience and read the room, and you can feel energy. We've lost that. And so now we only have what we see and what we hear as basically the guides to making decisions around our presence. And so with that said, I think it's really important that we leverage and we harness what we have in front of us. And so what does that mean? I call it the triangle of power. And this is where the focus needs to be in this 2D world. And so what does that mean? It's focusing on everything from the top of your head to your shoulders, because this is really the focal point in the conversation. And so we need to focus on this triangle. And so we've all seen the memes and the stories of, let's say, someone doing an interview, and then maybe the camera slips down and you see them wearing shorts or jogging pants or what have you.
All other things.
That's a reality. But I think some things have not changed, which are things like understanding who our audience is and adjusting and adapting our tone, our delivery, our messaging to our audience. And so it's still very important to keep those things in mind, because if you don't, then a lot of your messaging might just fall flat. It might not resonate, and it might be considered tone deaf. And so while some things have changed, I think other things haven't. It's also always important to be to dress situationally appropriate. And so if you are giving a big presentation to a new potential large client, then you want to make that extra effort and not, of course, just show up in a t-shirt, but you might want to throw on a blazer or what have you. In fact, the blazer or the suit jacket is really the most powerful item in the wardrobe. And I want people to think about it and use it strategically. And so in the case of that really important presentation or interview or what have you, even though you're working from home, just throwing on a simple blazer can immediately elevate your presence and the image that you project and the messages that you want to convey. And so those are just a couple of simple tips.
Okay. So for women in the audience, the blazer would work too, or how would we approach it from that end?
A blazer or its equivalent. I think that layers certainly add a little more formality. And so think about how can I add a layer? Because a layer just connotes a little more elevation, a little more elegance or what have you. And so I'm not saying that you have to do this all the time, but I just want people to be aware and be strategic. There was once a time where image consultants would go into organizations and they would really focus on telling people what to do, what to wear. You have to wear stockings. You have to have your skirts 3 inches below the knee. I'm making this up. You have, and people are just tired of that. In fact, last night I did a presentation to a group of entrepreneurs in an incubation program. And so about halfway through the presentation, one of the women said, "David, I just have to say that I'm so glad to hear these things that you're talking about, because I came into this thinking, oh my gosh, here we go. Someone's going to tell me what to wear and what I should look like and what have you." I've gotten away from all that. This whole notion of dressing for success, yes, the concept is important, but I think the terminology is dated and people are just tired of being told what to do. So what I do instead is I develop and I provide frameworks. And by teaching someone the framework, it empowers them to make their own decisions. It's almost like if I were an architect professor or teacher, I can teach you how to build a house, but I'm not going to tell you what color to paint it, how large your room should be. I will provide you with, I'll provide you with the framework, the structure, the blueprint, but it's up to you to really make the decisions on those final details.
Okay. Someone posted a question a few seconds ago. I just saw it popped up. Latrice, what do you think that emotional intelligence ties into soft skills, the EQ, to connecting to soft skills?
Yeah. Emotional intelligence is, first of all, thank you so much for the question and for the engagement. Emotional intelligence is very important and it is a soft skill. And so emotional intelligence is really about, number one, being aware. And some people don't have a very strong sense of self-awareness. It's almost like, hello, get a clue, be aware, be self-aware. But number two, understand the perceptions, understand messaging that we're conveying, and being empathetic. And so empathy is so critical, so crucial to a lot of these topics that we're talking about. And it's a really important component of being emotionally intelligent. That's being able to read a room, being able to adjust and adapt your style, your delivery, your messaging, because again, sometimes one's presence can come across as very monotone and tone, and they're not able to adapt and adjust according to their situation. So while they're intelligence or their IQ may be very high, or even their technical capabilities, if they lack the emotional intelligence and they're not able to adapt according to a situation or be empathetic if an employee or peer is going through a difficult situation and not demanding this deliverable, then I think that a lot is lost if they don't have that ability to be emotionally intelligent.
Okay, Latrice, thank you for that, because that opened up another question, another avenue I want to pursue. You mentioned earlier about an audience. So I do a lot of facilitation just like you. And one of the things I always do when I get to a venue, I get there before anybody else is there. I look at the layout, and then there's people coming in, and I see who's gravitating towards who's everybody talking to. And I'm kind of sensing this person may be a little more higher on the totem pole, or people defer to this person. I'm reading everything. I'm taking everything in. And as I begin my presentation, I'm adjusting to that. So I'm letting the audience kind of dictate, initially starting out to try and bond, with these people, whether it's a board of directors I'm working with, or C-suite, or just workers in the human resources department. Each one of those would require a different type approach. And that's always worked for me. Am I on point in looking through it, through that lens?
Yeah, absolutely. What you were just talking about, to me, I call the power of observation. And so it's about walking into a room and observing and making mental notes and adjusting your actions, your messaging, what have you, according to what you've taken in and according to the insights and conclusions that you've drawn based on what you've seen. And so to me, that's also that's a demonstration of emotional intelligence. And a lot of people might miss that piece. The power of observation is so important. In fact, to be honest with you, I think that the power of observation is what got me to where I am today. What do I mean? I grew up as the oldest of 5 children in the city of Trenton, and my parents didn't work in corporate America. My father was a minister, and my mother worked in retail and other admin type of jobs. And so I didn't really have any examples. And so when I started working in corporate at a management consulting firm, I remember going out to dinner for our very first dinner, and we went out to sushi. And to be honest, I had never had sushi. This was a long time ago.
I knew it was going to go there.
And so I basically observed, and I looked, I listened, I didn't freak out or anything.
Yeah.
So I think that the power of observation is very, very important. And fast forward a few years, I was getting promoted ahead of time. People were looking to me as like a role model because I exhibited and exuded a level of professional maturity that was beyond my age. And it was just all because I was able to observe, watch, mimic those people that I admire. And so we can't leave that part out of the conversation.
Yeah. So you know where mine came from? I'm kind of a National Geographic fan, and I love to watch the animal shows. But I saw a show years ago. It was about snakes. They can't really see that much, but their tongue, when they stick their tongue out, they're sensing what's happening around them, and they're able to find prey, to eat. Everything is done by reading the room, reading the area you're around. And that's pretty cool. And then as I started giving speeches and all these kind of things, I'm watching people in the audience. I'm seeing who's moving. I'm seeing who's with me. I see who's sitting there like this. I absorb all of that in everything I do. And it works because I can adjust. I can make adjustments on the fly and do all these kind of things. So that takes me into another question. What do I do if I have a virtual interview that's coming up, say, on Monday, and I'm trying to prepare, going through everything? How do I manage that presence in that type of situation?
Yeah, well, virtual interviews are very common these days. And I think for interviews, I really like to take an old school approach where I want the person to actually put on a blazer or possibly a tie. I'm not going to require it. I want the client to
Okay.
make the final decision, but at least just make an effort. And the reason I say that is because think of the interview as almost like your wedding day. This should be the best that this employer sees you. And so
Okay.
why not really make the best first impression? Again, it's not required, but you might want to consider it. In fact, I've done a lot of image consulting with people who were interviewing during COVID. And so I would have to do image consulting virtually. And it's becoming it has become very, very popular and common now. And so there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, we have one opportunity to make a first impression. And so
Yes.
think about how can you make that best impression? And again, you can make the decisions. I might advise you and might suggest, but ultimately it's up to you. Number two, I want us to think about the colors that we're wearing. Colors are very powerful. They send psychological messages to people. And so if you want to appear more authoritative, then high contrasting colors are better. So if you wanted to come across as very authoritative, you might have worn, let's say, a blue suit, or excuse me, a blue blazer, or maybe a black or a darker color. But what you're sending and what you're communicating by what you're wearing now is an image that's very approachable, that's very, I don't want to use the term soft, but it's just much more approachable. It almost looks supportive or what have you. And so we need to be aware of the messaging that just even the color selections, the patterns, the designs that we wear are important. I've actually heard some stories of interviewers asking people, and I'm not sure how I feel about this, but asking people to stand up to see if they're wearing the suit pants or the matching suit skirt or what have you, or if they took the shortcut version and decided to wear a pair of shorts or boxers or leggings or what have you. I think that what that communicates is a couple of things. Number one, how serious did this person take the interview? Number two, is this going to be a person who likes to take shortcuts or who likes to deviate when no one's looking? Again, I don't know how I feel about that because you are in your own home and the focus is on the power of the triangle of power. But I have heard stories of people being asked to stand up.
Yeah, I think that's going. I think that's going a little too far. But my way of looking at, because all of my work now is virtual, I dress up completely. I don't have on shoes, but other than that, I dress up completely as if I'm going out to work. And I don't change that. So one point I thought about, again, understanding your audience. So I've done some work with boards, and I noticed. Mentally, I notice that every time I have a board presentation or board workshop, I will always tend to gravitate towards my pinstripe suits. For some reason, my black pinstripe suits, and I don't wear a tie, but it's a starch white shirt. So my way of looking at that is connecting to that tier. That tier could possibly understand that. Whereas if I was working with say the entire HR department, I would dress a little more casual. Makes sense, kind of. I want to understand who I'm. And Latrice's question was talking to that emotional intelligence of what are you picking up and how do you adjust to that? That tying into that soft skill approach.
Yeah. First of all, I love that you're thinking about it from that perspective, and you're making decisions about your attire based on who you're meeting with. In my book, The Zen of Executive Presence, I actually provide framework. Yeah, slight little plug. I provide a framework for readers to help them be better informed about making the best decisions and the right decisions for them. And so remember, I've gotten out of telling people what to do, what not to do, how to do it, but I provide frameworks. And so this framework suggests that you should look at three things. Number one, who's your audience? Number two, what is your role in that meeting? So are you there as the presenter? Are you the lead on this new account? So think about your role, and also think about the environment and the circumstances and the culture. And so I think that a lot of people really want to be authentic, and trust me, I believe that we need to be authentic. I struggled with demonstrating my own authenticity when I was younger, and I felt like I had to be like everyone else. I'm now much more comfortable. And so authenticity is very important, but at the same time, we have to be emotionally intelligent. We have to be able to read the room, and we have to adapt. I think one of the greatest leadership lessons that we can take away from COVID over the past year is just the importance and the ability to adapt. Look at companies such as Peloton. Peloton instructors started teaching from home. As a result, their stock went through the roof. People started buying Peloton bikes. It became really hot. News shows that happen every single day did not miss a beat. The Today Show, they started recording from home overnight. And so if we aren't able to adapt, it doesn't really send, I think, the right message that we want to send. So my whole point is that we have to be aware, and we have to consider these things. Again, you make the decision, but I just want you to be aware of the different variables that can impact the message that you're trying to communicate.
Okay, two things. You mentioned Zen of Presence. Give us so what caused you to say, I need to put a book together to capture my thoughts and get it all down and get it out to people to guide them through whatever period they're going through now? Talk to us about the Zen of Presence.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. Well, I actually started my career as a management consultant, and I did it for many years. And what I've decided is, or after about, excuse me one second, I'm on a call right now. I'm sorry, I have plumbers here.
That's okay. It happens all the time.
And we just have to go. Can you bear with me one second?
Yes, go ahead.
Again, reality.
Okay, let me give you one. I was laughing because I was doing a session out of Europe the other night. So when I do the European sessions, it starts like at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and we go to like 11. Yeah. And my laundry guy for my shirts comes, and he's continually ringing the bell, and I'm trying to ignore it. And I said, excuse me for a second, I got to go pick my shirts up. And I told the guy, I said, if you ring one time and I don't come, just leave. Don't do this again. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And
yeah, go ahead.
Well, while we're on this topic, I just have to say that it's made us just be more human and just more relatable, because things happen. The dog might run into the frame, or the kid might run into the room, or what have you. And so it's just made us more human and relatable, because things happen. And I told the guys before I got onto the call, I'm going to be on a very important call. Please do not disturb. But yeah, I was.
That's okay. I think everyone in the audience has had those moments. So you welcome to the club.
Good. Thank you. It's all about how you manage it and how composed you remain. Yeah. So I try to remain composed and just dealt with it.
So take us back to executive presence and how that all kicked off. You were in the middle of that.
Yeah, so after working as a consultant for years, I realized that I was missing something. I didn't quite feel fulfilled. Even though I loved my work, I loved
Yeah.
traveling and working with clients, it was great, but I felt like something was missing. And so I've always had this fascination with style and fashion.
Yeah.
So I decided to actually move from Chicago because I started my career living in Chicago. And I moved to New York City just so that I could be around people working in fashion. And I started taking classes at FIT. And I didn't want to be a stylist, but I wanted to be an image consultant because my purpose was to blend my business background and experience with some notion of fashion, but not in an editorial way. So I started doing it, and I did it for many years on the side and on the weekends. And so I eventually said, you know what? I'm repeating myself, and it seems like a lot of people don't know this information. I'd like to write a smart book about style or image. And I want it to be a book that will resonate with professionals. And so that's why I wrote it. And so I wanted to give people the guidance, the framework for how to think about their image and their presence as a tool, because it is a tool. We need to think about it strategically. Just as we have our resume, we have our LinkedIn profiles, we also have our image as a tool. And so if we think about it that way, then it can really shift your perspective. And so that's what really inspired me to write it. How I came up with the name, as I was writing it, what I was realizing is that executive presence is something that is not it's not a hard skill per se. It's not if you do this, this, and this, that equals executive presence. I do talk about it in that way as a framework because I have to give people something to go by, some guidelines or something to aspire for. But executive presence to me is something that you can describe, you can kind of guide people, you can point people in the direction, just as the Zen Buddhists would do for followers who wanted to achieve enlightenment. And so it's not, you can't give someone enlightenment, you can't give someone executive presence, but you can provide the direction, the map, and point them to it. And so I saw a similarity between Zen Buddhist philosophy and this idea of aspiring to and achieving executive presence.
Okay. So that takes us to, you just created this online course I've heard a lot of things about, executive presence, the mini course that's available online. So give us some insights on that.
Yeah, so it's actually being launched right now. It's my very first online course. It's called the Executive Presence mini course, very straight to the point. And I created this course. It's based primarily on my book, a lot of the concepts that are in my book. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to take that book, which will take you a couple hours to read, and I wanted to be able to boil it down into micro learning videos. And so it consists of 8 videos. Each video is between 2.5 to maybe 4 minutes. And each video is accompanied by a worksheet so that you can reflect on the information that was taught or communicated. And you can see how it applies to you or how you might be able to implement some of the concepts. And so it's micro learning. It's designed for busy people who are on the go, who can watch it on their commute. Not to say that we're all commuting now, although that's changing. But that was really the idea behind it, giving people something that was easy to access, convenient, and also quick, because I know that's the world that we live in. People like to consume information that's quick, and they don't want to spend hours watching something.
Yeah, so people that are listening now, what is the link to that? I think we posted it down here, but just walk us through the URL.
Yeah. So first of all, my website is McKnightimagelab.com.
Yes,
And so if you type that in and just slash executive presence mini course,
it's on the screen now.
easy. Um,
Yeah.
they can have access to it, or they
Okay.
can find out how to get access to it.
Okay, great.
So I'm very excited about that.
Okay, cool. You know, as we begin to close out, one of the things I want you to discuss from your side, professional side, is I also coach a lot of executives, and one of the things that I get a sense is popping up is this thing called imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're here at this level, but they're not feeling it, and the fear of being so-called found out.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us some professional guidance on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's first just clarify what imposter syndrome means.
Okay.
It's essentially a psychological pattern where an individual will doubt their accomplishments or their talents, and they have this persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. Despite their accomplishments, despite their achievements or their years of experience, they still think that they might be a fraud. And so I actually do a lot of coaching around imposter syndrome with my clients. And it shows up in men as well as women, junior employees as well as senior level employees. And so it's pretty pervasive. So here's how I coach and how I deal with it. Number one, the first step is to acknowledge it. And to recognize, oh my gosh, this is happening. I also want you to think about, are there any patterns that you're noticing of when it shows up? And so,
triggers.
The triggers, exactly. Those triggers, those prompts of when you might really start feeling this imposter syndrome. I also think it's important to recognize that no one is perfect. And this is a common thing that a lot of people deal with, and everyone has their moments. And so just by acknowledging it and realizing that it's okay, the world is not going to end, people immediately get better. But it's important not to stop there. What do we do about it? How do we address it? There's this internal critic that we always have, and all of us have it, and it's telling us that we're not good enough, you're underqualified, you don't really deserve that promotion. What makes you think that you can negotiate on your salary? Be grateful for what they've given you. And so when we hear that voice, and we all have it, acknowledge it. But we have to talk back to it and say, you know what? Yeah, I hear you, but no, I'm going to ask for this promotion, or no, I'm going to do whatever it is. And so I think it's important to recognize it, but then counteract against it. Talk back to it, shut it down, quiet it. And there's a few tactical things that I do with my clients, or have them do, to really combat the imposter syndrome. Number one, sometimes I may ask them to write down as homework or an assignment 25 accomplishments. These could be wins, awards, recognitions. And basically what this does is it starts to ground you in reality.
Here's what I've done.
Oh my gosh, wow, I have done this. I was recognized for that. And it really starts to help you rewire the brain, because if we constantly think one way, our brain is going to naturally gravitate in that direction. But we have to rewire the brain to have it start thinking in a different way. And so I also have them review these accomplishments right before that big meeting, right before that presentation. Remind them of their value, and that where they have gotten was not just handed to them, and that are qualified to be there. So that's one thing. I may also have them just write down 25. In fact, my coach had me do this exercise and she had me write down 50. 50 words or phrases that were positive qualities that I or myself would use to describe me. So things like being organized, being very professional, but also being strategic thinking, being write down 25 of those words that you or others would use to describe you. Also review those, internalize those qualities, and really focus on those and hold on to those. Another simple thing that you can do is affirmations. I actually, well, I'm just coming back to New York after being in Miami for a while, but for over a year, I had 10 affirmations written and printed out, and they were on my wall in my bathroom next to the mirror. And so, of course, you're in your bathroom many times a day, and I would try to read those affirmations. In fact, I did that list to see if some of them have come true.
Yeah.
They have. But writing down affirmations, we need these constant reminders that we are good, we are qualified, we are worthy, and we deserve what we have achieved. And so those are just a few simple tactical.
Yeah, I got to tell you, those three that you just talked through, those three exercises, those are powerful. Because when I started laughing when you talked about that chatter, and I call it the chatter. The other voice is always talking to you, and you have to control that. And people develop different ways to control it. I have my techniques that I use, and it works for me. But sometimes when the so-called alarm goes off, it starts up, and all these things come to play. So thank you for that three-point exercise in doing that. So in closing, if you could leave us with a couple of points, what would it be for the audience?
Wow. I think number one is it's really important to be self-aware, to know what are some of the things that you need to work on regarding your executive presence, your leadership presence. Number two, realizing that executive presence is much more than appearance. I know we spent a good amount of time talking about appearance, and I do still think it's critical to the conversation, but it's much more. Think about your communication style, your behaviors, your online or virtual presence. Number three, take action. Read certain books on leadership presence, executive presence, podcasts, what have you, but take action, do something small. Start with tiny actions. In fact, I recently read a book called Tiny Actions by B.J. Fogg. And in the book, he says that behavior happens when three things are present: motivation, ability, and a prompt. So motivation is really what will motivate you to take that action. So it could be maybe feedback you've been given. It could be something else, but we all have to be motivated in order for us to do anything. So think about any action. What's the motivation? Ability. Most people like things to be easy these days. And so what is something that's easy, that's not going to overwhelm you, that's not too complicated? Because when we start to complicate things and give people a lot of tasks, that's when you don't do it. It just seems too hard to accomplish.
Overpowering, yes.
Yeah, think of easy things. And then number three, a prompt. So maybe this conversation today is the prompt that you need to start to really think more critically about your executive presence. And maybe just listening to this conversation is going to cause someone to say, you know what, I do need to work on this. Now's the time. And so those are just a few points that I'd like to leave with people. And the last thing I'll say is our image is a tool. Just like our resume, just like some of the other tools that we have, think about it as a tool and use it strategically and have it as a part of your toolkit and know how to leverage it and adapt accordingly.
Dave McKnight, thank you so much. Our topic, the role of executive presence in a post-COVID-19 period. So many takeaways, so many nuggets from this. So I thank you so much for coming on as a guest. And I'll see you next time I'm in New York. Thank you so much. Stay online.
Absolutely.